Thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Marc Sternberg, and I am the Director of Education Giving at the Walton Family Foundation. We are enormously proud to be a sponsor of this event and a thought partner to the folks at the Reagan Institute as they help bring together such an important group of people for this critical conversation at this timely moment. The 35th anniversary of A Nation at Risk is an important moment for all of us to pause and reflect, both on how far we've come and how far we have to go. At Walton, we think of the issuance of this report, the moment of its release, as the moment at which our strategy, grounded in two basic ideas, that a parent should have the right to choose where their child is going to go to school, and that we're going to hold those schools accountable. We view the release of this report as the conception of that strategy. Today, hundreds of thousands of at-risk children in communities across the country are in a new kind of school. A charter school, a private school, a district school that is succeeding in a manner that is widespread and pervasive, proving beyond any doubt that quality schools at scale are possible for every child in every neighborhood. When we think about the new basics highlighted in A Nation at Risk, we should look to these schools, full of classrooms where students at risk are developing skills for continuous learning, and educators are innovating and fostering creativity. These are the type of schools we think that the National Commission on Excellence in Education could only have dreamed of when they released A Nation at Risk. This progress is something to celebrate. Second, our view is that A Nation at Risk is the moment at which accountability at scale was first conceived. It was the moment at which we as a nation acknowledged broadly that schools should be held accountable for outcomes, and that we had to get serious about measurement. For years, a bipartisan constituency of policymakers, local, state, and national, have demonstrated a remarkable commitment to this idea of accountability and measurement. We worry, though, that this progress is now in jeopardy. The idea of accountability is built on a concept of policy that has three essential ideas. First, parents have the right to know how a school is doing. Second, they have a right to choose where their child is going to go to school. And finally, they have a right to know that schools are going to be held accountable for how they perform. As President Reagan himself said, all of American education needs to be accountable for the only result that matters, and that is student learning. But what was once a fundamental and essential principle to improving our public schools, accountability for student learning, needs refortification. And all of this is happening at a critical moment when the Every Student Succeed Act is rolling out to states, when responsibility for measuring student learning is now becoming primarily a state responsibility, putting state and local leaders in new positions of authority in what we know to be a politically charged moment. There is so much to celebrate, and so much of what we have to celebrate dates back to this report. But there's hard work ahead at a perilous moment. I say this not just as a foundation leader, I say it as a former teacher and school leader who knows firsthand how important meaningful performance measures are. And that is why today is so important. A conversation about the new basics must include at its root a standard definition of what a great school looks like and how we think about measuring and reporting on the school's success. For sure, reading and math proficiency and growth are essential. We have to measure them and know them. But today, so too are novel measures important. new measures that tell us about things like kindergarten readiness and workforce readiness. So as we best prepare our children for the demands of college, and as policymakers best prepare for this next chapter, we challenge our panelists today to address what the future of education looks like and what the new basics should be. So with that, thank you again for being here. Thank you for having us to the Reagan Institute, and I'll hand it off to our moderator, Lauren Camera of U.S. News and World Report. Lauren, off to you.
Quick photo. Where is the camera? Just look right there. Okay. We were told we have to take a photo.
It's a panel on the new basics, so we thought we'd start with a selfie.
Yeah. Thank you guys all for being here. As Mark mentioned, this panel is about the new basics. So we're going to be chatting about the skills and the knowledge that K-12 students need to know today, as well as how post-secondary education can shift to prepare not just high school graduates, but also those who are currently employed, whose jobs might be changing in the next few years, with the new skills they're going to need for what some people call a new collar economy, whatever is in our future. And we have a very stellar panel here today. I'm not going to go through their whole bios. You guys can find that online. But from my left, we have Pam Allen, who is the founder of Lit World, Mary Snap, who's the corporate vice president of Microsoft Philanthropies. I'm very excited that we have a student on our panel, which we very rarely get to hear from, the on-the-ground level. We have Teals Masawi, who is at Vanderbilt University. And last but certainly not least, Fritju Kalata, who is the CEO of the International Society for Technology and Education. We have a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. If you're in the audience, you can submit questions via the RISE app. If you are joining us online, you can submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag RISE2018. So I am going to kick off this question to everyone, and it is very broad, so I'd love for you guys to really just have a great discussion. And to start, let's talk a little bit about what skills students in K-12 need today. I mean, we had the 35 years post Nation at Risk. We heeded some of that advice. We flew the coop on a lot of other things. If we could press the restart button right now, what would schools look like to prepare students for today?
Well, let me just start with that, and I would say let's not press the reset button, let's look forward. Mm-hmm. And when we look forward, we see that there is so much change happening right now with technology. You can't open your computer or your cell phone without seeing a new app, a new story, a new job, frankly, job disruption as well. And that means that students need to be prepared to be lifelong learners. And so what I would say is that computational thinking is the new basic. And if you say, geez, what is that? Does that mean we all become computers? The answer to that is no. It really means that we take information, we learn how to assimilate it to form a problem statement, and then we go about a sequence to solve the problem. Many years ago, when I started at Microsoft, I felt like an alien among all the engineers. I was a woman, for one thing, so that was a little bit, there weren't very many there at the time. But I began to realize that I actually thought a lot like the engineers because I went to law school. So I learned computational thinking at the age of 30 in law school, and we cannot wait that long for our young people today.
I'd really like to echo what Mary said about computational thinking and how that plays into digital literacy. Something that I found at Vanderbilt that I think is really important. We're obviously, as a nation, pushing each other to become more proficient in coding and other STEM professions and STEM activities, but something that I found at Vanderbilt that we do really well is pushing our engineers and really all majors, to think about forecasting for the future. One class that really exhibits that is in our engineering school that covers the topic of technology forecasting and assessment. So instead of just saying, we'd like you to learn how to use this particular computer program, they're asking the students to say, when you look at this today, how do you think this is going to change in 10, 20, 30 years? How will it, like you mentioned, disrupt the market? And how can we prepare our students, like you said, to be lifelong learners? And what are the skills that are required to make sure that we're not just stuck in learning what's happening right now? Because that will be irrelevant for the students, particularly in the K through 12 arena, when they get to be in the job market.
And I would say just one thing. A data scientist, as we've learned from the events of the news in the last little bit, a data scientist needs to know some civics, some ethics, and maybe even some history.
Absolutely.
In order to do it right.
Absolutely.
So I just I echo those comments. I recently gave a talk called Why Coding Should Be a Required Course for All Humanities Majors. And I think it's really important that we're thinking about why it's so important that we're teaching CS. It's not so that everybody goes and gets a job in programming somewhere. Some people might, and that's great, but that's not the purpose. The reason is because we need to have these skills. If you think of any tough problem that we're dealing with today, the solution, at least in part, is going to involve code. And if we are not training the next generation to think that way, we are outsourcing our ability to solve problems as a nation. And that's scary. And we need to be really thoughtful about how are we doing that. And I think the other piece that needs to come along with it, which we heard from the first panel today a little bit, is this idea of digital citizenship. What does it mean to be a good digital citizen? What does it mean to use technology to improve your community and to help make the world a better place? We talk about digital citizenship. You ask schools, are you teaching digital citizenship? Sure we are. Really, what are you teaching? Well, don't post pictures that are inappropriate and don't do mean things online.
So true.
If your digital citizenship curriculum is a list of don'ts, you're not teaching digital citizenship. Because digital citizenship is a list of do's. It's how do you organize people for good. It's how do you help make the world a better place using the tools that we are all very comfortable with mediating online.
So I agree with everything. I love this panel already. But I also maybe take a little bit of another perspective on it as a literacy advocate, which is that, I sometimes say that Abraham Lincoln was probably the first great social media expert because he knew how to make things short. And he was the amazing messenger that way. But so I think the skills around all of this, the technology is a tool, computation, coding, all of it these are all languages we're learning. But I think at the end of it, the fundamental heart and core of it is that literacy itself is humankind's greatest innovation because it's our way of making story. And so every generation has amazing ways and technologies. At one point in time, the Post-it was a technology. Remember, we thought that was all fantastic. The first Post-it, it was like we were amazed, and the ballpoint pen and the printing press and all of these things are all. And now, the phone or the way we communicate digitally or the way we code, all of those things are a way of communicating. And literacy is really the way I define it as reading, writing, speaking, listening, and also viewing, the way you're looking at the world, the way you're looking at a YouTube video, the way you're looking at someone's text message, the way your heart breaks over an email or over something you saw very briefly on Snapchat, And so literacy itself, the idea of literacy as the power of story, to me is the heartbeat of education. And as much as I believe that the reason literacy survives in the midst of so much change is because it's so adaptive. It says, but we're human beings and we want to connect. The writer E.M. Forster said, only connect, and that's how we feel. That's how we feel as we work on our mortality and as we work with children. And I see it when I work alongside children and young adults is their hunger to tell their story. Story matters. And when you look at and think about whether it's politics or science or making a budget for your work, all of that is about storytelling. That's what it is. I'm going to tell the story of who I want to be. And I think our education is, when we talk about innovation, we tend to talk a lot about technical things, but I think innovation is also about story. And making space for young people's stories in school, really listening to them. What are they thinking? How would they design a classroom? How would they design the way they're interacting with their teachers, their mentors, their friends, their peers? Making school more about story, about how you tell your story. That at the end of the day, we want to be heard and we want to listen to others. We want to open up. We read because we want to see who we are, and we read because we want to know the world, and we want to have that window to the world. And so I hope that when we talk about the future and the new basics, we're also talking about fundamentally what makes us human and what technology is for. It's to connect us over many distances and in many ways.
That is a great segue, actually, because I'd love to hear a little bit of if anyone knows some on-the-ground things that districts are doing, any school system that jumps out at you as a great model for preparing students for some of these new basics, or thinking about preparing students differently than we have in the past.
Richard, do you want to talk about Rhode Island?
I would love to, and I'm thank you for giving me the tip to do that. So before my current role with ISTE, I was the Chief Innovation Officer for the state of Rhode Island, and one of the things that there were two things that we tried to do there that really, I think, are groundbreaking. One of them was, computer science offered for every student, whether you were from kindergarten on up through high school, and we had many really phenomenal partners, including the Microsoft's Teals program as part of that. So that was one piece of it. And the second piece is that we said, we want to show what it looks like to create an environment where learning is personalized and tailored to the needs of individual students. This is an incredible opportunity now with technology. We sat here on the panel before, and I heard something that honestly took my breath away. I heard somebody sit here and say, we have students that come into schools that are at different levels, some that need more help, and so why should we be responsible for helping them get up to a higher level? Because they already came in so far behind. Honestly, I almost couldn't breathe when I heard that. That is absolutely the reason that we have schools. It's like a hospital saying, you know, that person came in with appendicitis, so we're going to be okay if they don't do well. But the person that came with poison ivy, we're going to nail that one, right? The purpose of hospitals is not to get people a little better, it's to get them healthy. And with schools, we have that same possibility. Now, look, everybody has always said the idea of personalized learning. It's not like it's some crazy new idea, right? I was a teacher. I taught high school Spanish. I knew that I wanted to adapt the learning to the needs of my students, but it was really hard to do when I had 5 classes of 30 students each. That's very, very difficult. And this idea of saying, can we use technology to help adapt and tailor and adjust learning to the needs of individual students at every day, that's amazing. And it does not mean, by the way, that we have students sitting in front and clicking next on a screen. That's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about using technology to help map and provide next steps that are relevant and are tied to students' interests and passions, and help educators manage the ability to provide customized, tailored learning experiences to every student. That's what it takes to give an equitable public education, and that's what I'm really excited about.
Great. I'd love to hear you speak, but I'd love to also give you a couple of examples of things that I think are really interesting and innovative going on right now. One Richard mentioned, and it's a program called Teals, which Microsoft runs and organizes, but frankly, Teals is not possible without 1,000 tech volunteers, 75% of whom do not work at Microsoft. So Teals is a program where engineers volunteer to go in and team teach with a teacher in high school computer science. And the last class I visited actually had a female welding teacher teaching first-year computer science alongside a Teals volunteer. And the goal is that after 2 years, the volunteer exits and the teacher goes forward and continues and sustains the program. Right now, we are teaching in 350 schools in 29 states. We'll be expanding that to 500 schools based on volunteers. It's just an interesting example of public-private partnership that I think we can use more of that kind of creative thinking. The other one I'd give you the example of is something in Washington State. And essentially, it's called the Washington State Opportunity Scholarship. It is a coalition of business and legislators. And for every dollar that business raises, our state legislature has matched. The goal is to provide scholarships to Washington state students, low and middle income, to go to college in a Washington state college, studying either in an IT or a healthcare field. So in this instance, essentially, so far we've raised about $200 million in 7 or 8 years, the match with the institution. We have about 8,500 students through the program, and we're going to continue that work. And it's an example of pulling business into the issue, not to tell teachers how to teach, but to provide that incentive for students to learn those areas in jobs that are in just super high demand. And it's a real partnership. It's a great example, I think.
I have an example.
Sure.
Just thinking about New York City, I worked very closely with the city of New York, and it's an amazing school district because it's so diverse and it's so large. And in some ways you could say it's so unwieldy. How can we have a vision together? Because I do think, in some ways, I think we sometimes in the work of education, we mix up vision and tactics. You know, we kind of come in with a lot of tactics, but then don't step back and say, what's the big vision? What's something that really does unite us? In New York City, we have a great chancellor who, she's about to retire right now. She just did retire, Carmen Farina, who started as a teacher and became a principal and then became a superintendent and then became the chancellor. It's a great story that she has. But she really believes in this whole idea that we're talking about all day today, about what Dr. Rice, I think, said so eloquently earlier today about the idea of lifelong learning. And she's instituted universal pre-K. In New York City, every child ages 3 and 4 goes for free to early childhood programs in New York City. We're already seeing a transformational difference. When I walk into kindergartens and I'm with children at the kindergarten level, I can already see that they have a familiarity with text, that they are bold in their ideas about books and thinking about what their passions are as readers and writers. You can see it. The difference is profound. And the other thing that she's done is, in collaboration with my organization, Lit World, is she's very interested in closing the summer literacy gap, something we can do from charters to public schools to private schools. In my initiative around what we call Lit Camp, which is in 5 weeks, we can make huge strides. A child in 5 weeks out of school, not being close to text online or offline, loses a huge ground. It's called the summer slide, and the chancellor and I said, let's make that the summer leap instead, and that's what we're doing, and it's hugely important. And then the third thing, the final thing I'll say about New York City that I think is very powerful is this idea of personalized learning. I think is, again, it's technology. Thank goodness for this digital conversation, because I think it brings that forward. But even in the books children choose to read, you're much more engaged with text if you get to make choices about it. You're much more engaged with conversation if you have some agency over it. And in New York City, we're doing a lot of work around this idea of independent reading, of choice reading, of writing that is fueled by your own passions and interests. So personalized learning is about technology, but also about the real lived lives of our children, and I think that's something New York City does really well.
Yeah, that's really helpful. It's always nice to hear about on-the-ground examples, because a lot of times in DC we love to talk about high-level policy thinking, so really getting a better understanding of what that looks like in schools is always helpful. I wanted to go back to something Mary mentioned about the Washington Opportunity Scholarship, that there are a lot of states looking at different models like this, but the focus that Washington has on the specific degree that students would be pursuing, I think is really interesting and different from how a lot of other states are pursuing that type of like a free community college model or something like that. I'd love to hear from you guys, and maybe Teals, you can talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground. In the post-secondary role, what role do colleges and universities and some of these emerging, nano degree programs, things that are just starting to bubble up or get underway, what role do they have? How can they morph, I guess, from what they are now to providing skills for jobs that we don't even really know potentially may exist for the students who are entering freshman year right now?
Yeah, so I actually want to return to include this question, but I was so happy to hear about a lot of the great successes we've seen with Teals in Rhode Island and New York City. But I also want to revisit something I've seen at Vanderbilt and among my other university friends is that we are coming to university and post-secondary education with such different baselines. And I know all day today we have been hearing about the responsibility of states to take charge and for localities to get involved. But I see a problem at the national level when there are so many things that we're not covering and not requiring. I can give a couple of examples. One being sexual education. Only 24 states and DC require sex ed of some form, and only 13 of those states require those curriculums are medically accurate, which is very problematic and quite strange. And in 2015, the Texas chairwoman of the Board of Education admitted that the guidelines that were given for Texas education in terms of history downplayed slavery and kind of skirted at Jim Crow laws. And so what we're seeing when you get to the university level is that if you're not dealing with historically and scientifically accurate information, you're not requiring the states to do what is really it should be expected, which is to provide true facts and real knowledge, then you can't even come at the university level and expect people to succeed in nanotechnology or be benefiting from these programs in healthcare or in STEM. And so I think that's something that I'd really like to highlight is that I think there are so many great opportunities to expand what types of programs are being pursued, what kind of innovative majors we can come up with. And I've seen so many of my friends taking on really cool research projects. My roommate, her name's McKaylee. She's an earth and environmental science major, and she's currently working on research to look at which types of rocks are going to best dispose of nuclear waste, which is wild. I'm not really into rocks, but she is. And it's been so cool to hear her story. So I think we're doing innovation, but that requires at the state level, and her state of Oklahoma, for them to start giving scientifically based information, or else you will not be as successful unless you've had support at home.
And I would be remiss in this conversation not to say that still less than half of high schools in the United States even offer any kind of computer science class. Not that, we need everyone to be computer scientists, but it's that computational thinking and the fact that 70% of the jobs of the future will require some level of IT skills. Not functioning skills, but creativity skills. And so that, I think, is something that's really important too. But then you were going to really answer the question.
No, yeah. No, so yeah, in terms of talking about what we're seeing on the ground, at the university level, I think post-secondary institutions have a responsibility to come up with something that is both creative, it depoliticizes the content so that we're coming in again with that baseline. But I also think that in addition to all of the STEM expertise that we have here on the panel, that we need to focus on things like communication, critical thinking skills, problem solving, being able to be agile and adaptable. These are all things that have come out of some of the biggest reports for education.
One of the things that we haven't talked about yet, you kind of got there when you started with sort of the nano degrees, is really the growing movement now around apprenticeship programs, certificate programs, stackable credentials. And as we think about what jobs of the future look like, having this baseline of the kinds of things that Teals is talking about, some IT skills, and then being able to have certificates that are recognized across states, and frankly, not just in IT. I think I actually am drawing from an example of the country of Switzerland, which has a very strong apprenticeship program in its high school areas. There are 230 various apprenticeships, each of which come out with a certificate where a young person at the end of the apprenticeship can really enter a very nice, well-paying job or go into university. Now, I'm not suggesting that model we can just pick up and shift and lift, but this notion of providing these kinds of certificates and skills, which a 19-year-old or a 50-year-old could take advantage of to essentially transform and transition into a new job, is just super important for us to develop.
And I guess I would like to add on to what Teals said about the idea of the communication skills, because I think that we sort of historically think of those as soft, when in fact they're the most rigorous of all. And I think when working with young people, I'm so inspired too. I love the story about the rocks, because I think the idea that you're sharing that together, that's not your thing, but that's her thing, but then somehow you're making a new thing just by being in that, conversation. And I think that's something that, when thinking about your question about higher ed, I actually think our academics, I think people really, higher education really needs to come along with this idea that you're not the conveyor of information anymore. You have to be a side-by-side coach with your students. Really, they're amazing. They come with so much. They come with their hunger to learn, their curiosity, and I think our academic, at all levels of education, but I think we have this very dated idea that now that Ms. or Mr. or Dr. Google has really solved, which is if you need content, you can just go to the Google bar, So really, what's the role of the professor? What's the role of the 8th grade teacher? What's the role of the kindergarten teacher? Is really to be a coach, an accompanier to that inquiry that you're doing with your roommate. That's amazing. That's a true education, is how are you going to be influenced? You're interested in public health. She's interested in the rocks. I mean, that's an amazing conversation. And our country is known for its ideas. We generate ideas. So in my view, it's like what are we preparing our kids for is not, there's no answer to that, because they're the ones that are going to create. That's our country. That's what's so amazing about our country. And I think when we see everything as we're giving something to these empty vessels, I think we miss the whole point. They are so full of so much. And so the idea is, how are we going to shift teaching and learning so that we're more facilitating inquiry rather than giving content?
Yeah, no.
So I want to build on something really quickly that we were talking about on this higher ed thing, because there's a fundamental sort of challenge with our higher ed model that I think we just need to grapple with for a second, and that is our higher ed system is actually not built around the needs of the students. And so we can talk about making it authentic and doing all that, but until we grapple with that fundamental misalignment, there's only so much we can do. Now, there are some notable exceptions to this. I think I saw President Crow here somewhere, and ASU and some others are doing some really interesting things. But by and large, if you look systematically from the cost to what's being taught to the schedule, it is not tailored to the needs of the students who go there. And to illustrate this, and building on your point, I was speaking to a group of college presidents and to provosts, and I was making this case, and I said, you're not preparing students for the careers that they're going to look for. And somebody raised their hand and they said, I don't think it's our job to prepare students for their career. And I said, okay, that's interesting. What is your job? They said, no, our job is to just pass knowledge from one generation to the next. We're the keepers of the knowledge, and we just sort of pass it on to the next people, and that's our role. And I said, okay, let's try something. Let's go into your Econ 101 or English 101 class and just ask all the students sitting there, how many of you think that you're here not to get a job, but just to have the past non-knowledge from the keepers of knowledge from the generation before? Raise your hand. And if they all raise their hand, we're good. I don't have any problem. But if not, we have a misalignment, a fundamental misalignment. And a solution isn't necessarily that we have to change higher ed. Maybe what we do is we just go to the web page, on the web page for higher ed, like they have on the Surgeon General warning on cigarettes. You just have like a little warning that says, hey, warning, we're not going to prepare you for a job, but we are going to just pass knowledge that we think is important on to you. And if you're good with that, come on in, and it's going to be awesome, right? But if you're not good with that, then we have this fundamental misalignment that we have to work through. And college can't be so expensive, and it can't be around schedules that are not flexible for people who are working 2-3 jobs, for people who are not first-time, full-time students, who, by the way, don't even count on the statistics when you look at people who are passing college. They don't even count. And so we have to rethink the design of higher ed, and certainly technology can help, but also tapping into the knowledge of students. Once we start to do that, all kinds of possibilities open up, and it gets really, really exciting.
Yep. I mean, the way I think to kind of crystallize, I would say that information is the commodity, and it's teaching that's the scarcity. And we need to find ways in which we can ensure that our teachers are respected, and have the tools to teach in the 21st century in a different way than just, blurbing out information. It's about communication, and it is about collaboration.
So in thinking about some of these, new skills and how post-secondary education might change, I will admit right off the bat, I was an English and sociology major. STEM was very far from my thinking, although in now thinking back, I did have to create some pivot tables every now and then for sociology, but it was not part of my thinking when I was in college. And I think there is still always a little bit of hesitance among some people when you are talking about how important of a role STEM is going to play in the future. And I think, Mary, you mentioned not every job is going to require a technology degree, but you are going to have to know how to use technology to do your job in some way. At least this is the thinking of those that endow it to us. So it's coming, so get ready. How can we convince colleges, especially those that have such a strong liberal arts bent at their heart, that, this is something they need to learn to embrace, and it's not a bad thing, and it doesn't mean that your Literacy 101 class must be taught online or what have you. How do we sort of get there?
Yeah, I mean, it is, what we're talking about with this kind of STEM is additive for sure.
Right.
It's not a replacement.
Right.
And both needed. But I'd argue you really need to start before college. You really need to start around 4th or 5th or 6th grade with this. And we really also need to start talking about curriculum that is culturally and locally relevant. So for example, I don't think, in some ways, it's not too much of a mystery why most engineers are men. Girls are not encouraged at 5th and 6th and 7th grade in STEM careers when they look at the teachers and all the practitioners in the field, and they're men. So we need to have more role models for young girls in those ages going forward. And we need to recognize that some of the STEM work is present in everything we do. I recently was talking to a young mother whose daughter came home and was talking about her art class. And she was drawing essentially parallelograms in the art class. I mean, that's STEM, but it's also art. And we really need to expand how we think about that. Microsoft has this great game called Minecraft, which I love. It teaches kids the baselines of coding. But we need the Princess Daisy one or something too, for young people. So I think we need to start at this basic level. But I will tell you one story, and it goes back to Richard's comments. I recently spoke to a high school principal in a Teals classroom. He was a brand new principal, and so he didn't have that background. He didn't quite get why we were doing computer science, frankly. And he happened to have been a college roommate of Magic Johnson. And when his daughter graduated from a great university with an advertising and marketing degree, he arranged for her to have an interview with the Lakers organization. She got to the finals, amazing young person, lost the job. And when she asked why, they said, because you don't know how to code. And he said, why would that be? I mean, why would that be in an advertising job? And I thought, well, a lot of advertising is online these days, and it's not like you need to be a computer scientist, but some basic level of understanding, how you might manipulate and create your image online is now a key part of that job. And that's going to be more and more and more true.
I just want to go ahead and kind of brag on Vanderbilt a little bit in terms of some of these issues. With our engineering school, particularly thinking about role models, we actually have made a commitment to have double the national average of female engineers in our program, which I think is incredible. But in terms of your question, when we think about how do we bring liberal arts and people who are not necessarily into STEM into the same thought processes or get them excited about STEM. I think Vanderbilt has a really good model for creating spaces for these kinds of people to come together. We recently opened this space in our new engineering and science building called the Wondery, which bridges the gap between entrepreneurship and innovation. You can go into this space. It kind of looks like Google headquarters from what I've seen online for Google headquarters. I've never been. But it's a really cool space that offers you access to laser engravers, 3D printers, and no matter what your major is, you can go in and utilize those technologies, and then you're encouraged to actually come in with different groups. Someone who has a really, really cool invention idea will bring in their friend who is a business minor who's studying human and organizational development to take that idea and figure out what the marketing strategy would be, and then someone who's pre-law comes in and talks to you about the patenting process. And it's like a literal space that is forged for collaboration, and I think that's how you have to get people excited. You're not going to convince everyone to take a coding class, although I think everyone should probably have some exposure to that. You're not going to convince everyone that they need to take microbiome, even though I think that's also important information to know. But when you get people excited to see how those puzzle pieces fit together, then I think you're going to get those universities to both be research-based and excited about STEM. And at Vanderbilt, we're also offering a liberal arts core education. So
It's experiential learning, which is great. Yeah, it's really great. I will say the other thing about STEM is that, you know, we're at this place where there is huge market demand. There's market demand from employers with 500,000 unfilled jobs today. There is actually a movement from students and parents who say that they want to have STEM, and it is an opportunity, I think, as we seize this moment to finally address equity issues. Because we have to be sure that no one is left behind. We have to be sure that the gap doesn't get bigger. And we have an opportunity, I know I didn't say we should reset, but we have an opportunity to reset with STEM and really address some of the equity issues in this country, I think.
I think just building off that, I mean, I think maybe I would take it in two directions, which is I also think that, again, you know, the human heart plays a role, the human story plays a role. I think also underneath, when I think about right after 9/11, all around New York City, there was a big wave of poetry going by the internet, on Facebook, on all over. I mean, it was in every possible way that you can imagine. Across email, across every possible venue, people were sharing poetry. And the poet laureate at the time was Billy Collins. And he was asked the question, why is poetry so important right now? And he said, because poetry tells the story of the human heart. And I do feel that underneath our longing to innovate and to make and create and to play, that's what I love about STEM for girls and for boys, for all children, young people, to be in that kind of environment that you're describing from early childhood, to say, because actually our early childhood, they do get this better than anybody, because they're always playing. My couch, when my kids were little, was never a couch. You know, it was a ship. It was a fort, and that is the thing we don't want to lose when they go to school. And that's what I think is amazing about the liberal arts, about STEM, is when it's playful. One thing I think I would like for us all to think about is why in schools, when something is truly fun for a child or a young adult, we think it's not good for them. What is that? I don't get it. As soon as
to adults too.
and adults, as soon as I'm in a classroom where either I'm reading aloud to children or they're making or creating or building something, and you know somebody enters who's observing or assessing, they'll say, "Oh, And I'm like, what? This is it right here. This is it, because that goes back, you know, if you kind of think about this morning, the opening remarks, that idea, it began with that statement about the pursuit of happiness. And yet when we think about constructing school and environments around school, we think about what's the future going to hold. We have no idea. Everything seems permanent until it's not. There might be someone in this room who even remembers shopping at Sears. You know, you probably thought that was going to be forever. And I think that we cannot predict that. Those are just the placeholders for how people do things. And I think the pursuit of happiness is something we've actually been missing a lot in education. Ask a child, ask a 5-year-old, ask a 10-year-old, what makes you happy in school? And when children say there's nothing to feel happy about here, then I immediately say, I sit down with the superintendent and say, we have a big problem. I believe in formative assessment, not just the end of the year assessment. I believe in ongoing formative assessment. How am I doing? How is my teacher doing? How are my students doing? I want my families to be able to understand that conversation and the family. I want the language we use not to be just about Lexile levels and end of year standardization, but about all throughout the year. This is how your child is growing. Before, he didn't want to read aloud to his baby brother. Now he does. Those are the kinds of things that our families have hunger for too. But I think the pursuit of happiness does matter. And that pursuit of happiness, it's in STEM, it's in liberal arts, it's in literacy, it's in reading a book and then rereading it. When I'm in classrooms and teachers say, we're not allowed to reread because rereading is a waste of time. And I think to myself, the way I learned to read was, we went to the library once a week, so if I was finished with a book, I just started it again. And that made me a really fast reader. I'm really a super fast reader because I got to know the book so well. So if we care about the pursuit of happiness, then all of this is about, it all matters, it really does. But I think we have to really keep our eye on the true prize, which is you learn to do well what you first loved to do. And I think we have to build that in.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to say, I was talking to a group of people that are designing schools, and they said, you know, what we need to do is we need to make learning fun. And I stopped. I was like, stop this right now. Learning is fun. We don't have to make learning fun. What we have to do is stop making learning boring, right? That's what we got to do. Sorry, go ahead.
You know, we only have a couple of minutes left, but I did want to touch on the issue of access, of course, which we maybe danced around a little bit, but haven't really had a full-fledged conversation about. You know, when thinking about, you know, digital literacy and STEM and all of these issues, I think a great example of framing this question is with the release of this year's NAEP scores that came out earlier this week. There were some state school superintendents who were a little bit worried because it was the first year that the test was given to students digitally on a tablet. And so you had some concern out there about, well, the test scores are gonna drop because there are some states whose students aren't as prepared to use digital devices. They don't have access to that type of thing at home. What are some of the ways that you guys see that we could help to bridge the gap when it comes to the new basic skills and ensure that our most disadvantaged students, low-income students, students of color have the same access to those opportunities?
I would just sort of start, and I bet everyone has lots of things to say on this topic, but I would say, use business. Yes, business has been a funder. Yes, business does program work, but we can advocate. And it's important for, I think, business to get engaged in advocacy in education. And some businesses have done it. We've done it for a long time. We're sort of now engaged in a state-by-state effort to ensure that computer science is even allowed as part of the, counts as a requirement in math and science. In many states it was not. But there are other things that we can do. The Washington State Opportunity Scholarship that I talked about, which we advocate for with all of our local businesses, 80% of the students there are first-generation college. 50% girls, over 60% students of color. Use us. Use us.
My part that I would add to that is we are in a really exciting year because this is the first year when we have almost ubiquitous connectivity in schools across the country. Now, to be clear, I'm not putting up a mission accomplished banner. There's still a lot more work that we need to do, and we need to make sure there's connectivity at home. But when I came to the U.S. Department of Education and I walked in and took on the role of the Director of Technology, we had 20% of schools that had access to connectivity. That was only about 6 years ago. At the end of this last year, we had 96% of schools that were connected, thanks in part to a huge upgrade and shift in a program called E-Rate that many of you know about. But here's the point, is we actually finally have connectivity in ways that we had never seen before. But connectivity does not fix problems in education. Connectivity does not close equity gaps. Connectivity does not engage students, and it doesn't keep talented teachers in the classroom. That requires us to notch up to another level, which is how are we using these tools? And these same tools, technology is an accelerator. That's all it is. And if you apply it to ineffective practices, it will accelerate ineffective practices. And if you apply it to good practices that close gaps, that empower teachers and engage students, it will accelerate those practices. And so we have a huge responsibility over the next year or two to make sure that we're using this new tool, this new technology, in a way that will transform learning and change lives and not just digitize what we've always done.
Totally agree.
I am actually being told we have time for just one question, so I hate to cut the conversation off, but potentially if anyone has additional questions, you could come up to the panelists afterwards. But we have a microphone here, so.
Good morning. My name is Lillian Lowry. I'm the Vice President for P12 at the Education Trust. The Education Trust is an organization that's focused on really helping bring attention to historically underserved students and students that are low income. So I believe my question can help you continue the discussion. One of the things that we are most concerned about is access. Opportunities are there. I'm listening to all the things that you're talking about, and they are amazing. When in Maryland, worked with Gloria Flock, who was vice president of Northrop Grumman. She was president of the electronics division. And what they did was go into each school district and choose 2 seniors from each school district every year, bring them in, because she was one of the first women to be a computer scientist, and actually teach them the math, tutor them in the math that they would need to apply to engineering and computer science school subjects. And then they would have one day each month where they shadowed the Northrop Grumman employees. So there was an applied piece to the opportunity they offered. That happened because we were in this ecosystem that is Baltimore City and urban, and they're all there. What do we do about our students who live in rural areas and or are in very low, impoverished communities that won't have this opportunity? What are you thinking about there, and how can we be more intentional about that 50% that you mentioned?
Great question.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. We haven't at all talked about professional development and training for teachers, and that, that's its own really, really long conversation. And I agree with Richard that technology is an enabler. And it enables practices. But just in terms of those kinds of remote learnings, there still are over 23 million Americans who do not have broadband because it is just purely not available. So we need to bridge that gap, and that helps to address it. Once that happens, then you do have access to information, and frankly, the technology is getting so much better for remote learning. It's not a panacea. But there are things we can do, augmenting things with technology in some of these rural areas that we just really need to focus in urban, yes, but rural areas too.
I think you bring up a really good point, but what I want to highlight is that inequity and inability to access resources it transcends the issue of digital learning and media and literacy. To return to some of my previous remarks and thinking about the information that is shared with students and how it is not equitably accessible across the country. I mean, accurate information is not. And as you mentioned, there are actually a really high volume of states in the South and in rural communities that aren't getting adequate information, like I mentioned before, in sex ed or in Texas on slavery and Jim Crow laws and actual history and social science. So I think there actually needs to be a push, like national mandates for requiring that adequate, scientifically and historically accurate information is shared across the board. And I think that's going to get at some of the issues that we're seeing with inability to access further opportunities when you meet the needs, the education needs of the students in all communities, when there is a push and national leadership to make sure that we're educating people in like the farthest corners that we're not reaching necessarily with digital learning, but we're at least at the base level giving them proper information, and we're requiring that that's the case.
I think to equity, I mean, it's everything, because I think that idea from the rural to the urban, that our young people are hungry to connect and to be together in this grand work of becoming lifelong learners. And so I think there's something very powerful happening right now, which is this idea of our young people as ambassadors for their own learning, that it isn't something that's just coming down from somewhere else, but that we can activate our young people to say, how can we communicate before, during, and after school? How can we be part of book clubs that stretch for miles and across countries, that we can have conversation that it is about our local community, but also about how we tell the story of ourselves to other communities. And I think with that is what you said about professional development. I think that's really crucial. I also think the idea of seeing our kids as lifelong learners that begins, that the community, that at the state level, that we are part of that learning journey from early childhood all the way through adulthood. And also, I think that, again, just back to what the team here has said, access to resources is about beginning with connectivity, like Richard was saying, but also, even so, we live in a blended world. We're not, just because we all have connectivity doesn't mean that every time you want to read something or look at something, it's always got to be on your phone. We still cherish and love text. It's something I really campaign for. I just took a 10,000-mile trip across the country with my husband and our dog, talking about what it means to make a super reader. And we talk about the research that shows that books in the hand, holding a book, whether it's on your tablet or in that old-fashioned paperback, that those books in hand, even one book that a child has at home, actually transforms their academic learning in school. Even just one book, think of it. It's so simple. Sometimes I think the solutions are actually, they're not expensive, and they're not even that complicated, but it goes back to that, I don't trust it unless it's really complicated, it takes a really long time, and my kids are really unhappy, you know?
Well, we are now standing in between you and lunch, so we will let you go off to that, but I just wanted to give a round of applause, please, to our panelists who did such a great job.